In the middle of West Africa, surrounded by dry plains and modest towns, lies Burkina Faso, a country that's long been overlooked by the world. Most people barely noticed it on a map, often writing it off as just another poor nation in a tough region. For decades, Burkina Faso lived under that small reputation. Many of its people scraped by in rural villages, where nights fell into total darkness, schools struggled without electricity, and hospitals could hardly keep life-saving equipment running. But that old picture is starting to blur. In its place is a new, almost unbelievable story of ambition and daring. Right now, Burkina Faso is building something so large it seems impossible at first glance. An $800 billion hydroelectric project that promises to light up not just Burkina Faso, but an entire corner of Africa. The man behind this bold vision is Captain Ibrahim Traore, a young leader who came to power in 2022 after a military shakeup. In a place that's known more for coups and political upheaval than massive engineering feats, Traoré is trying to rewrite what's possible. His plan revolves around the Mohune River, a broad waterway that cuts through Burkina Faso's rugged terrain. Where others saw difficult land and seasonal floods, Traoré saw potential. The idea is to build a system of 11 enormous dams along this river. Together, they'll form the backbone of a smart electric grid that's set to deliver clean power across 15 West African countries. It's not just about lighting homes, it's about powering schools, hospitals, businesses, and farms. In short, it's about giving millions of people a fair shot at building a better life. When first announced, the $800 billion price tag triggered more skepticism than excitement. How could a nation that's wrestled with poverty and relied heavily on foreign aid possibly afford such an undertaking? Critics in Western capitals dismissed it outright. But Traoré pressed on, framing this not as an act of desperation, but as a deliberate choice to break from old patterns. For too long, Africa's story has been shaped by outsiders, its minerals pulled out of the ground and shipped away, while its own people struggled without basic necessities. Traoré's project is something different. Instead of turning to Europe or the US for funding and expertise, he's built partnerships with emerging nations like Cuba, Iran, and Brazil. These countries have sent engineers and technicians not to take resources, but to help build infrastructure. It's a subtle but powerful shift. Burkina Faso is choosing its allies on its own terms, not through the legacy of colonial relationships or debt-heavy deals. To understand how radical this project is, it helps to look back at Burkina Faso's recent past. Formerly called Upper Volta under French rule, it gained independence in 1960, but remained largely at the mercy of nature. The land is dry, rainfall is unpredictable, and farming, the livelihood of most Burkinabe, has always been a gamble. Even in the capital, Ouagadougou, blackouts were routine. In rural areas, electricity was often non-existent, leaving families to rely on kerosene lamps or open flames that posed risks to health and safety. This lack of power didn't just make life inconvenient, it blocked progress at every turn. Children struggled to study by dim light. Hospitals couldn't keep vaccines cold or operate machinery needed to save lives. Entrepreneurs had ideas, but no power to run the tools of modern business. Over time, the gap between possibility and reality grew into a chasm. Then in 2022, Traoré rose to power on a promise of sweeping change. At just 36 years old, he was driven by a conviction that Burkina Faso shouldn't be forever dependent on the generosity or interests of others. When he looked at the Mohune River, he didn't just see water flowing past, he saw the future flowing with it. The blueprint that emerged was staggering. 11 massive dams would be built at key points along the river, each one carefully positioned to create a cascade of energy. As water moved from one dam to the next, it would spin huge turbines, generating electricity that would travel through thousands of miles of cables across Burkina Faso and into neighboring countries like Mali, Niger, Ghana, and beyond. But Traoré didn't stop there. He insisted on integrating the latest in smart grid technology. Instead of a patchwork system prone to outages, Burkina Faso's new network would use advanced software, even artificial intelligence, to balance supply and demand in real time. That means when a factory in Ghana ramps up production, or a village in Togo needs extra lighting for night classes, the grid can instantly adjust, delivering power where it's needed most. At the same time, the system is being designed to withstand Burkina Faso's unpredictable climate. The dams will have spillways to control heavy rains and reserves to hold water during dry spells, keeping the turbines running even when nature doesn't cooperate. The smart grid also incorporates solar power, ensuring that if something goes wrong at one dam, lights won't just flicker out across an entire region. It's not hard to see why many doubted such a vision could ever get off the ground. An $800 billion investment is immense under any circumstances, even for richer nations. For a country where large swaths of the population still live without steady incomes, it looked fantastical. Yet under Traoré's leadership, construction has advanced with surprising speed. Local workers are being trained to handle high-tech machinery, learning skills they never thought they'd acquire. More than 1.5 million jobs have already been created, many filled by young people who once thought they'd have to leave home to find work. A former street vendor might now operate a crane, while a young man who once dreamed of migrating to Europe might instead program the smart systems that keep power flowing across borders. All of this marks just the beginning. In Part 2, we'll look more closely at how this project is reshaping daily life in Burkina Faso and beyond, from bustling markets to quiet classrooms, and why the rest of the world is now paying close attention, some with admiration, others with concern. As the dams rise and the cables stretch out like veins across the land, everyday life in Burkina Faso is beginning to look remarkably different. It's not just about new infrastructure, it's about how that infrastructure is reshaping what's possible for ordinary people. In the dusty outskirts of Ouagadougou, markets that once closed at dusk are now staying open well into the evening. Stalls glow under electric lights, traders keep their scales and card readers running without fear of power cuts, and shoppers linger later knowing they can see what they're buying. A woman selling tomatoes might set up a small lamp powered by the new grid, drawing more customers than ever before. Meanwhile, shop owners are investing in refrigeration, expanding what they can offer beyond just dry goods. These small changes add up, injecting fresh energy into local economies. Go a few hours into the countryside, and the transformation feels even more profound. In villages that had never seen electricity, families now flick switches and watch bulbs light up modest homes. Children gather around tables to study after dark, reading books instead of squinting over smoky lanterns. A simple ceiling fan runs through the hottest hours, making small, mud-walled houses a little more bearable. Health clinics that used to struggle to keep vaccines from spoiling now have reliable refrigeration. Nurses power up equipment they once couldn't dream of using in remote posts. Stories are circulating of operations that no longer rely on candles or handheld flashlights. In some places, maternal mortality rates have already started to drop because clinics can keep emergency equipment running through the night. It's also changed farming in dramatic ways. For years, Burkina Faso's farmers lived at the mercy of irregular rains. Crops would sprout and then wither under a scorching sun, plunging families into cycles of debt and hunger. Now, with electricity to run pumps, farmers are pulling water from rivers and underground wells, irrigating fields even during dry stretches. The extra harvest is not only feeding families, it's generating new income. Many farmers are selling surplus crops to towns and even across borders, building savings for the first time in their lives. This agricultural shift is also changing the social fabric. Younger people who once left villages for cities or risked dangerous journeys abroad are staying put, seeing that there's work and a future at home. Parents who watched their children drift away in search of opportunities are now hiring them back to help on expanding farms. Entire communities are stabilizing because the economic pull that once drained them is reversing. These personal successes are echoed by the bigger picture. Businesses, both local and foreign, are taking note. More than 40 green technology companies have already set up near the dam sites, drawn by stable power and the promise of an emerging market. They're working on everything from smart irrigation to lightweight solar panels and hiring locals who are learning technical trades once reserved for big global hubs. What started as a hydroelectric dream is slowly morphing into something like a tech cluster. Some even call it the Silicon Valley of African energy. This economic activity is setting off chain reactions. As workers earn steady wages building dams or wiring up villages, they spend money at local shops, restaurants, and markets. Entrepreneurs are opening small businesses to meet the demand. Tailors upgrade to electric sewing machines. Bakers install ovens that don't rely on wood fires. Truck drivers find new contracts hauling goods from newly irrigated farms to city markets. In some regions, local banks are reporting record levels of small business loans, a sign of people willing to bet on their own futures. Burkina Faso's neighbors are watching closely, and many are eager to link up. The smart grid being built alongside the dams is designed to carry electricity across borders, supplying 15 West African countries. In Ghana, garment factories that once staggered operations around blackouts are placing orders for new machinery, confident that power will flow reliably. In Mali, secondary schools are getting computer labs for the first time. In Niger, water projects are plugging into the grid, planning to push back advancing deserts with sustained irrigation. Beyond Africa, attention is shifting too. When Captain Traore first floated this plan, Western analysts largely dismissed it. To them, an $800 billion build-out sounded like a fantasy for a small landlocked nation with a history of coups. But the ground reality is forcing a reassessment. Investors from China, Russia, and India have moved quickly, offering to fund satellite labs, supply specialized turbines, and negotiate energy deals that could tie their own industries into Africa's growing power network. Europe is also paying attention, partly out of interest, partly out of concern. With the EU under pressure to cut carbon emissions and transition to renewables, Burkina Faso's massive hydro capacity looks increasingly appealing. Talks are quietly underway about a potential $20 billion extension that could run high-voltage lines under the Sahara, eventually feeding African clean energy northward into European grids. It's a prospect that flips decades of energy dependency on its head. Instead of Europe supplying the world, a once overlooked African country could become a key exporter. Inside Burkina Faso, this surge of interest is a point of pride, but also caution. Captain Traore has been deliberate about who he lets in. His administration is prioritizing partnerships that respect local ownership and don't saddle the country with hidden debts. It's why many Western corporations, used to calling the shots, find themselves watching from the sidelines as deals go to Cuban technicians or Brazilian smart grid firms. For Traoré, this is more than strategy, it's ideology. His speeches frequently circle back to a single theme: dignity. For generations, Burkina Faso's wealth flowed outward while its people waited on the goodwill of others. Now the country is writing its own contracts, training its own engineers, and sending power across borders on its own terms. Every dam that goes up, every village that lights up, is a quiet, concrete step away from dependency. In the next section, we'll explore how these developments are stirring up deeper geopolitical shifts. As Burkina Faso and its neighbors become less reliant on traditional Western donors, the balance of influence in Africa is changing. What does it mean for old alliances, and how might it reshape global power in the coming decades? We'll dig into that next. The scale of what's unfolding in Burkina Faso isn't just changing daily life or jump-starting local economies, it's triggering quiet tremors across the global balance of power. For decades, much of Africa was tied into a familiar cycle. Western countries provided aid and loans, often with strings attached, while African nations shipped out raw materials, minerals, cocoa, cotton, that fueled distant industries. Infrastructure projects came from global lenders who dictated the terms, keeping the system of dependency firmly intact. Now, a landlocked country once dismissed as one of the world's poorest is flipping that script. With its massive hydroelectric project, Burkina Faso isn't just building dams and power lines, it's building leverage. Every megawatt of electricity it generates is a bargaining chip. Each mile of smart grid cable extending into neighboring countries deepens Burkina Faso's influence. Ghana, Mali, Niger, they're all signing agreements to tap into this new power source. It means that Ouagadougou is slowly becoming a hub for regional energy decisions, a place where leaders come to negotiate power supplies and secure their own futures. This isn't lost on the bigger global players. China sees an opportunity to strengthen its Belt and Road ambitions by connecting with West Africa's rising infrastructure. Russia views it as a chance to expand its engineering and energy footprint. India is eyeing deals that could guarantee electricity flows to its industrial partners in exchange for technology transfers. Even Cuba and Brazil, nations with their own histories of being overlooked by traditional power centers, have found common cause in building something that's not run by Washington or Brussels. Meanwhile, Europe is watching with mixed feelings. On one hand, the EU faces enormous pressure to cut carbon emissions and transition away from fossil fuels. Burkina Faso's hydro and solar plans offer clean energy that could someday feed into European grids. Early-stage proposals are already on the table for undersea cables running through North Africa into southern Europe, a future where African water lights up European homes. But there's also unease. For decades, Europe was accustomed to setting the terms of African development, funneling aid in ways that often doubled back to benefit European contractors, banks, and political goals. Now, Burkina Faso is inviting in partners on its own conditions. Contracts are being written in Ouagadougou, not Paris or London. That shift is small on the surface, but it represents a major departure from how things have worked since colonial times. Captain Ibrahim Traore understands this better than most. His speeches don't shy away from history. He often reminds crowds that Burkina Faso's minerals once left by trainloads, enriching faraway cities while local villages stayed dark. Now, he tells them, it's time for Africans to decide what their rivers, sun, and soil are worth, and to whom. At home, this narrative is fueling a surge of national pride. Young people, who once saw leaving as the only path to prosperity, are staying, drawn by jobs not just in construction, but in high-tech roles, monitoring turbines and programming smart grids. Universities are opening engineering and environmental science departments geared towards sustaining this transformation. Parents are pushing their children into these new careers, hoping they'll become part of a generation that never has to feel second class on their own continent. It's also changing politics beyond Burkina Faso. Neighboring leaders who once shaped policies around IMF loans and Western development targets are now watching as an African-led model starts delivering results. Some are drawing up similar blueprints for river power, digital grids, and regional energy markets that bypass traditional gatekeepers. What began on the banks of the Mohune River is gradually evolving into a continental conversation about self-reliance. Of course, it's not all seamless progress. Big projects attract big challenges. There are environmental concerns about how multiple dams might affect fish populations or downstream farming communities. Local activists worry that in chasing regional export deals, rural villagers might see their own water needs sidelined. Maintaining the delicate balance of growth, fairness, and sustainability is going to be one of the hardest tests for Traoré's administration. Burkina Faso has moved from waiting on foreign grants to negotiating multi-country energy deals. It's a shift from being seen as a charity case to being treated as a serious economic partner. The West is realizing this too late. While European banks deliberate and Washington crafts cautious statements, companies from China, Russia, and India are setting up shop, wiring funds, and securing long-term supply contracts. The geopolitical center of gravity for West Africa is subtly but steadily rotating away from old patterns. And perhaps most powerfully of all, ordinary Africans are seeing it happen in real time. In dusty towns once written off by development experts, children now do homework by electric light. Small businesses run fans and freezers without worrying about sudden outages. Farmers install drip systems that let them grow tomatoes in places that used to be dust bowls. Across the region, there's a spreading sense that they're no longer simply passengers on someone else's train. When future historians look back, they may well see this $800 billion hydroelectric gamble as a pivot point, the moment when parts of Africa stopped waiting for permission to build their dreams and just started building them. A country that was once defined by its lack of power is now literally and figuratively generating it, selling it, and using it to rewrite the rules. If this story of transformation, pride, and bold ambition resonates with you, we want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think about Burkina Faso's incredible journey. And if you believe more people should see how Africa is taking control of its future, give this video a like and share it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories like this, because the future of this continent is bright, and we'll be here to cover every step.